Last time, I showed you these pictures, showed you the landscape photos, and we listened to music. And I was making the point about the main thing, as I said in the beginning, that I want to focus on as we talk about beauty is the relationship between beauty and knowledge. And the bigger point, the more life application principle here, is that we have to make an extra effort because of the cultural context in which we live, in what I like to call the intellectual climate. We have to make an extra effort to appreciate beautiful things and realize the value in them. Because we do live in a world that has been so radically, dramatically, profoundly changed by the development of science and technology, historically speaking, in a very, very short amount of time. And that's wonderful. I'm very grateful to live in such an age, but it creates an illusion, specifically the illusion that all you need in life is scientific knowledge and practical abilities to make money, pay your bills, and to secure all the practical needs you have in life, and to live in the ways in which technology can affect your life and make it easier and more convenient. If you have those things under control, if those things are your main focus, then that's all you need. And that really is the key to human flourishing, so that all you need to know is the knowledge that is accessible to you through the scientific method or through the development of technology. And what I've been trying to emphasize is that that is a very, very distorted, truncated way of thinking, and it leads to a very impoverished life, a life devoid of the things that actually are most valuable, most meaningful. All right, so hopefully, and specifically, the kinds of things you can know, right, because we know things through beauty. And we're going to have a little interactive, a more interactive time in just a few minutes, because I want to listen to some music with you. And in music, in beautiful landscapes, we know something. Right? I like to say beauty is a conduit. Right? Conduit is like a pipe, and something comes through it. There's electrical conduit where you have wires going through the conduit. The conduit is the housing. It's in a way, it's the vehicle, but it's the power of the electricity that comes through it. It's the sustenance of the water that comes through a water pipe. Well, beauty isn't in itself, but at the same time, it's a conduit of a certain kind of knowledge. There's something that comes through it. And engaging with profound beauty, you know something. You are made aware, I would say that you're made more aware of a very, very important reality, even though we can't give clear logical articulation to what that reality is. At least not in the scope of our mundane, everyday world that's accessible to the senses. I wanted to show you, before we went on, we ended last time on this concern for qualia. Let me review that in just a minute, and then we'll go into this other point. So remember, qualia is the felt qualities associated with experiences such as the feeling of pain or the hearing of a sound or the viewing of a color. To know what it is like to have an experience is to know its qualia. And the most simple and one of the most clear examples is what I mentioned to you last time, is saying a favorite color. How do you explain a favorite color? And some people might associate it with something and say, well, I like this color because it reminds me of a good experience. But generally speaking, we only say that something is our favorite color because of the qualia, because of the inner experience that the color evokes in us. And there's just something about it. When we see that color, it just affects us, it moves us, it stirs us in a certain way, and therefore we love it. And we want to paint our room in that color, or we want to buy a car with that color, because the qualia, it evokes this experience. That too is an example of something you can't give clear logical expression to. You can't. Now, some people would argue against this, right? There are a number of people who would say otherwise. But my argument to you, what I'm proposing, is that it is complete absurdity to want to try to examine the qualia biologically. So if somebody said, well, what your favorite color is what? Purple, right? Okay, well, you know what? We're going to do a brain scan, and we're going to draw some blood. We're going to run your blood through the most sophisticated scanner, biochemical assessment that we have, and we're going to do the brain scan, and we're going to look at every lobe and every tissue of your brain. And in doing so, we're going to be able to explain to you why purple is your favorite color. That's absurdity. That's a category mistake, as I was saying a few weeks ago, like you're asking how many gigabytes are in a horse, or like trying to use the car scanner you plug into your dashboard to determine what's wrong with a sick child. These are two things that don't go together, and one is completely out of place. So in other words, our inner experiences, like the taste of sweetness or the color red, or the experience of music, these are, in their very essence, these are immaterial things, aka spiritual things, right? These are things that are not reducible to material properties. And here's the big thing, here's why this is so important to think about, and they are among the most important things in life. The most important things in life are not reducible to material properties, and they're thoroughly impractical. They're thoroughly impractical. So keep that in mind. Here's a way to illustrate it. I thought of just to maybe make it more clear if necessary. So we talked before about the two different words for life. I've mentioned that a couple times. So there's Zoe, which is the life of the heart and soul, the seat of consciousness and the desire for beauty, love, and justice. Our passions, that life that animates us. Remember in Greek, there's 4 different kinds of love. There's storge, which is common love. We might say courtesy, and it also involves the love between family members. Just the simple things like complete strangers is walking in front of you and they drop their papers and you instinctively kneel down to try to help them. All right, that's storge. That's just a love of mankind. There's phileo, which is brotherly love or friendship. There's agape, which is like the deepest, most self-sacrificial, profound type of love, most self-giving love. And then there's eros, from which we get the word erotic. All right, and it's the love characterized what we call romantic love. All right, it's consummated in marriage. Okay, think about. I appeal to this experience a lot because it's really an icon of one of those things that are most important in life and yet completely immaterial. When somebody has that experience of falling in love, right? When someone is in a relationship and the commitment and the affections intensify to the point where marriage is proposed. Okay, what drives that is the Zoe. Right? That's us. All right, that's the individual person, the heart, the soul, the passion, the love that would drive a person to say, for the rest of my life, I'm going to belong to you exclusively. That's Zoe. Right? That's the heart, the soul, that's the individual. Remember, soul means self. Okay, but that's essentially everything that makes us who we are. Now, I don't have the other word up here, but bios is the word from which we get biology and biography. And that relates more, and it relates to a range of things, but that's more in the category of practical life. All right, multiplication of cells, the chronology of your life, what year were you born, and what year will you reach this particular age bracket in your life, and so forth and so on. And when did you move from this location to that location? But it's practical, it's mechanical. All right. So you can think, if it's helpful to clarify the main point about the value of beauty and how it should be prioritized. You can think of these two in different categories. So you've got the Zoe, all right? So don't make movies about pure practical love. Right? I mean, at least maybe there's something you could think of, but they wouldn't be blockbusters. Right? I mean, think of all the various movie genres: fantasy, thriller, sci-fi, and even one that's set in let's say a mundane setting. The center of the plot is always something to do with the heart, with conviction, with love and hate and danger, and the exertion of, let's say, self-sacrifice, the exertion of oneself for the sake of others, right? That's what draws people to movies and books. That's why people are willing to pay money to buy a ticket, because they want to engage with something that's going to move them in that area. So in other words, have you ever seen a movie where the whole plot is something like this. Man wakes up in the morning. He goes to his breakfast table. He eats his omelet. He gets showered and dressed. Puts on a suit. Gets his briefcase. Drives to work. Files some reports that his boss is demanding from him. He has a little break, so he goes online and pays his utility bill and his car payment. Then he goes to lunch. He has a hamburger. And then he works through the afternoon in a meeting about budget cuts for the business. And then he goes home and goes to sleep. Have you seen that movie and you were a little teary-eyed at the end? No. Nobody's seen that movie. Because we would never make a movie like that because it doesn't move us. It doesn't animate us. It's not something that we would perceive such value in that we would spend money to see that. Right? It's all the practical and the material. And here's, maybe this is a somewhat helpful illustration. Here's what I'm trying to get at. Here's one of the main points. Okay, obviously, making money, making sure you can take care of yourself. You have a car that's in good repair. You have plenty of food. Take care of your health. All these things are essential. We have to do these. But the value of these things always comes from the spiritual part of life. Right? We get excited and moved about practical things only because of the passions and the spirit that moves us. Right? And it's because of what we experience through those things. And if ever, and again, we're prone to this is a vulnerability for us because of our scientifically empowered age. If we ever put our emphasis and our focus and just generally think of those practical material things as ends in themselves, then inevitably we will live a very spiritually, emotionally, aesthetically impoverished life. Because if you gray out the spiritual part, then, well, what is that? We can't see your love for a certain color or your passion for music. We can't see your love for your spouse with a blood test, or we can't see it under a microscope. So these things can't be that important. Let's just focus on the things that we know we can touch, taste, hear, smell, and see. Okay, if you do that and you obscure or marginalize a deliberate focus on the spiritual things, well, inevitably, those things will get dull too. Right? Because any fulfillment, any goodness, any real life satisfaction that comes from owning a car or whatever it is, going on vacation to a great place, it always comes from, the heart. It comes from the person, from the things that really matter, which is love and adventure and beauty and justice and so forth. And like I said earlier, we need to make extra effort to remind ourselves of that. And I used the analogy before about the bank and the art museum. Don't ever let anybody make you feel stupid because you spent so much time in the art museum and you could have been out making money, or you could have been out doing something that was of more practical value. Like I said, when you're in the art museum, you're actually much more attuned with things that can correctly be called real than you are when you're in the bank. All right. I want to read a quote to you that really sums up the point here about as well as it can be. From G.K. Chesterton, which I've referenced a number of times before. So Chesterton was a British journalist and writer and philosopher who lived back at the turn of the 20th century, late early 1900s. And he loved Charles Dickens. And Chesterton wrote a lot. He was genuinely a genius level thinker. He wrote at a level, and he was prolific to a degree that most normal people couldn't be. But anyway, he wrote a lot. He wrote a lot of literary criticism, read a lot. And he really loved Charles Dickens. And he wrote a whole book on Dickens and Dickens' work. And at one part in the book that he wrote on Dickens, he responds to the critics of Charles Dickens, Tale of Two Cities, almost said Pride and Prejudice, that's Jane Austen, Great Expectations, those are two of his big ones. Charles, certainly you've come across some of Dickens' story. Little Dorrit, that was Charles Dickens as well. Anyway, Chesterton responds to some of Dickens' critics who didn't like him, and they say, yeah, Dickens is not that great of a writer because his characters in his fiction are not lifelike. They're exaggerated. They're not like real life, and they're too cartoonish or exaggerated so you wouldn't really see these people in real life. And that sounds like pretty reasonable criticism, but Chesterton has a great side. He sees through that, and the way he says it, I think is really, really excellent in clarifying the main point. Look what he says. It was necessary to give a much deeper and more delicate meaning to the expression lifelike. Streets are not life. Cities and civilizations are not life. Faces even and voices are not life itself. Life is within, and no man hath seen it at any time. As for our meals and our manners and our daily dress, these are things exactly like sonnets. They are random symbols of the soul. One man tries to express himself in books, another in boots. Both probably fail. Our solid houses and square meals are in the strict sense fiction. They are things made up to typify our thoughts. The coat a man wears may be wholly fictitious. The movement of his hands may be quite unlike life. So let's sink in. Think about that one line toward about 3 or 4 from the bottom there. Our solid houses and square mills are in the strict sense fiction. Here's something maybe you've never thought about, maybe you have, but along the same lines that I made earlier about the point I made earlier about clothing. Why is there so much effort and emphasis and value placed on the aesthetics of food? Anybody anytime recently been to a really high-end 5-star restaurant? Okay, which one?
Well, I went to Ruth's Chris in Vegas.
Okay.
It was expensive.
Yeah, I bet so. That's all you need to say. You went to Ruth's Chris in Vegas, and nobody's thinking you got like a $10 plate there. Well, okay, when you go to a restaurant like that, let's say you got steak and vegetables and baked potato or whatever. Do they just get a plain white plate and just plop it all together, make sure it's separated, and just put it on your plate? No. And in fact, if you went to a high-end restaurant and they just not even like did it so that your food, like it affected the taste of it at all, right? So that the food was still not touching each other. They just put it on a plain white plate and put it on your table. Most people would probably complain. But what is this? Come on. And usually, like that's part of the skill of the high-end chefs is they actually turn the plate into a work of art, right? They'll like make little aesthetic designs with the sauce or whatever. How does that? How do you? The whole existence of food coloring. I mean, what if the alien landed and said, "Hey, we don't have this on my planet. Why does food coloring exist? It's not for nutrients. It doesn't in any way affect what you get out of the food biologically. It's all aesthetic." That's why Chesterton says our solid houses and square meals are in the strict sense fiction. They're to typify our thoughts. They're an expression of the soul, of the self. Right? Because we know something, there's something in us. It's just a reality of human being that we are aesthetic creatures. Beauty is like our natural habitat, you might say. Anybody seen? I guess this is a controversial one. I can't even remember all the details of it. It's a Disney movie from when I was like elementary school. Uncle Remus. It's controversial because it kind of took place in the Old South, and like the slave or post-Civil War setting. So understandably, but the rabbit in the briar patch, right. So like the briar patch is the rabbit's like main natural habitat. It's where he's most free and most himself, and he loves it. It's where he can just be totally at home. And yet, to the hunters or whoever it is that's pursuing the rabbit, he's always saying, "Please, please, whatever you do, don't throw me in the briar patch. That's the last place I want to go because that's the main place I want to go." Right? Well, beauty is the briar patch, and we're the rabbit. Right? That's the place where we're most at home. He says, "Our solid houses and square meals." Think about the house you live in, the apartment you live in. In the construction of your home or apartment, how much attention was given to the aesthetics? So in other words, how differently would your home look outside and inside if the only concern in construction was protection from the elements? And they're not going to waste money on extra angles or designs or anything that would cost more materials, paint, and so forth. Think about like these walls. This is drywall. You know what bare drywall looks like, right? Well, these are all painted. It costs a lot of money. I mean, think about how big this building is, how much how much money the paint costs. Why did they paint it? It adds nothing to covering the walls so they can't see into the next classroom or insulating it for heat escape. It's pure aesthetics. And this building probably cost $40,000 just to paint on the inside of it. Why? This is a fiction. In other words, it's not real life if you define real life by practical necessity. It's just the human soul expressing itself in every way it can. So, if we, again, allow ourselves to succumb to this mindset of, art, beauty, aesthetics, that's not really important because, come on, it's not going to perform some practical function, put money in your bank account, and on and on and on. We're diminishing, we're cutting off our spiritual oxygen supply, you might put it that way. We're kind of living at a lower level. Think of somebody in an oxygen-deprived room, and they've got just enough where they can stay alive, but yet it's diminishing, and they can't think clearly, and they just feel like they're subdued, right? They just want to go to sleep. Well, that's what will happen to us on the inside if we prioritize the practical over the aesthetic and make that, allow that to become our MO. And sorry for the typo there. I was copying this quote, and I didn't do it right. Anybody, just a trivia question. If you get this right, I won't add points to your midterm, but I will think more highly of you. So what's the typo there? First two lines. I usually comment on multiple people's paper on this point. Yes, two quotes, right? Remember, if you're citing a quote within a quote, you use singles, right? Single. And unless you're in England, and then you reverse it, because the British use the single quotes for where we would use a double and double where we would. All right, so my fault on that. Okay, I want to listen to some music, and along the same lines as showing the landscapes with the music last time. Sorry, okay. Messed up in the beginning and didn't get where I needed to be. So, by the same principle, I just want to show you these songs, I want to listen to them, and then think about the experience. Not really analyzing the music as music in terms of breaking it down and thinking about the genre and the progression and the structure of the song, but just taking it in and thinking about the experience. Now, this is always a little bit, maybe risky is too strong a word, but I find these are three songs I just came across in thinking about this segment of the class, and they just struck me as really powerful pieces of music. I feel somewhat guilty for not showing you a piece of classical music, because that's sometimes, I think, that's the richest and the kind of music with the greatest depth. And that's a deficiency on my part. I'm not very well versed in classical music. Anyway, I realized that if I were to give you the assignment of coming up with three songs to listen to illustrate the value of music and aesthetics, you'd probably come up with three very different songs. But hopefully, these are sufficient to get us to think along these lines, and these is kind of an experiential illustration to the point, right? So let's listen to these and talk about the experience. Observed in that, or any thoughts on the piece? Yes.
I think about just like all of them, and like the idea of beauty is like ultimate beauty comes from like when we use like our talents, like for those three videos, like they use their musical talents, like singing and being able to cello and that kind of stuff. And that's interesting. I think that was in one of our readings, how we talked about how like the ultimate beauty is when like somebody is their best self.
Yeah, definitely. The soul's upward journey talks about that. And that's a really, really great point, because have you ever heard anybody criticize electronic music? Like I played drums and percussion through high school and college, and for most people, if you've ever been into percussion, the one thing you hate is just it makes you cringe is a drum machine, right? Because it's a machine. It's just boop, boop, and then it goes, right? There's something about, even if you could come up with a machine that on a recording, it would be really, really hard to discern whether it was a machine or a person. Let's say in a live performance, there's something very, very significant that's missing, which is that human element, right? And that comes through. I mean, certainly that was a good demonstration of that. Somebody really cheesy phrase, but generally playing their heart out, right? Playing from the depths of their heart. And again, a song that they have no idea what the lyrics mean. It's just the music. Again, I find that just absorbing, as you watch these guys play. And you get the sense that their eyes are closed and they're so into the song that they almost have forgotten that there's a crowd there, because that song is just so rapturous in the way that they're playing it. And I find it very absorbing. I just get drawn into it. And again, it's something inside that says, yes! You ask me what, I wouldn't be able to tell you. I can't articulate the question, but the answer is yes. All right, that's one way to put it. What else? Any other things stand out to you in that one or the other ones? Didn't look it up, but I wonder how much tickets cost for that. I'm sure they weren't $5 a piece. I'm sure they were significantly expensive, and several thousand people there. Just as I was saying about sports last time, think about how passionate people get about sports and how much money they pay, how much money is generated from pro sports. And yet, there's no practical, in fact, it's impractical because you lose money. No practical benefit from it at all. Same thing with music. Right? None of those people that bought tickets to this concert are going to have a career advantage. None of them are going to have any sort of leverage and increasing their income from going to this concert. It's just an end in itself. It's just the thing. And the atmosphere, the attitude, the inclination that I'm trying to press back against is the one that would say, how much did you spend to go to that concert? Don't you have, are your bills paid? No, we do have our bills and be responsible, but just the attitude or the inclination that says, oh, come on, why would you spend that much money for that? And then it's over in an hour and a half, and then you're out, $100. Put that money back, that's about 3 or 4 weeks worth of gas money. Okay, sure, it is, but what have you lost? Right? If you succumb to that way of thinking, what have you lost? So hopefully as we think about this, it will move us to be more proactive, right? And we have to balance this with responsibilities, that we have to others. We shouldn't go and spend hundreds of dollars on a concert when there are people starving that we could help. Okay, that's part of the ethical life, is to balance that tension and wrestle with that and know when we have to sacrifice what would bring us joy or pleasure for the sake of somebody in need. Yep, got to do that too. That's part of it. But to sacrifice that just to be more practically sufficient, right? Just to make sure you don't have any financial stress in a couple months that you forego the concert. What is missed is so much more valuable than what would be gained in that situation. And this also illustrates the universality of what I'm saying, because it's a concert that went on literally on the other side of the world. Tens of maybe 6,000 or 7,000 miles from here, something like that. This is true. I wonder, it'd be interesting. Anybody take an anthropology class in here? I don't know if they address this, but it would be fascinating to read an anthropological study on music, or kinds of music in different kinds of cultures and development of that. I don't know, because I haven't studied it, but I would suspect it would be extremely rare, if at all, to find a culture where music is completely absent. Right? So that's a very, very telling fact about human nature. And the last thing I'm going to say, and this goes back to our discussion on natural versus supernatural. Now, I'll make a strong argument to you. You might disagree with me, but it seems to me, in light of all that we've talked about in this section on beauty and that about the natural and supernatural, it seems to me that, let's say, a purely materialistic, let's say evolutionary explanation for what we just saw would be an utter absurdity. So, for example, if the alien landed and said, "What is this? I don't understand what I just saw. These two men on stage with their eyes closed, with these upright things, making, vibrating the strings to generate frequencies. What is this?" And someone says, "Well, it's music." And then the alien says, "Well, what is that? Why did they do that?" And then if someone says, "Well, it's because over many, many years, human beings have developed in such a way that they developed the capacity to make these kinds of sounds because it results in a survival advantage, because when the males can master a musical instrument, the females are more prone to be attracted to them, and therefore their propensity for reproducing increases," and so forth. Yeah. If you believe that, then as the cliche goes, I've got some beachfront property in Utah. So, that strikes me as absurdity. I mean, not just an absurdity, but it's insulting. Right? Here's two people just, like I said, expressing the deepest part of themselves, something that resonates so deep in the heart, and through a talent, like you said, that they've developed probably for decades. And then to respond and say, "Well, yeah, ultimately it's all about survival advantage." So survival advantage, and they highly increase their propensity to attract mates through the cello. That's not an adequate explanation for me. Right? There's something much more deeper and real and mysterious there. All right, I'm going to read over a couple passages in the assigned reading. Let me skip over anybody had a thought to share. And then we'll move on to our next section. Okay, here is a piece from Augustine's Confessions about beauty. A little bit about Augustine. So Augustine lived and wrote in the early 4th century, so 300s. And I know I say this about several people that we read, but that's why we read them in this class. And the intro class is very appropriate. But so in each case, it really is true. I'm not exaggerating. In terms of influence on the way people think, just the impact on societies across the Western world, very few people have been as much as you might say a heavyweight as Augustine. He essentially invented the genre of autobiography, which is this piece called the Confessions. Because prior to Augustine in the book called the Confessions, there's no other comparable literature. And Confessions is a really, here's a way to sum it up. I was listening to a podcast. In fact, this is what led me to read it. I had come across this later in life. I should have read it a long time ago. But I was listening to a podcast a few years ago, and this woman said, "Well, I've always heard of Augustine's Confessions, and I hadn't read it." And she said, "So I made a point to read it, but I just read it because I wanted to be able to tell people that I read it. I didn't want to be at the party, and when someone asked me, 'Have you read that?' and this was a professor, she said, I didn't want to be the person who hadn't read Augustine, so I went ahead and did it just to make sure I had done it." And she said, "And then I read it, and I was never the same." And that's a good depiction of Augustine. That's how Confessions can affect people. I can certainly see that when I read it. So he essentially writes this book as a prayer, as if he's just walking along, outdoors in the wilderness by himself, talking to God, or he's just praying out loud, and then he writes it down. And then sometimes he'll stop and have these internal reflections, and he gives some really nuanced philosophical arguments and contemplations here. So it's a very rich book. But here, he's talking about beauty. And he's just asking, what is this? How do I see this and others don't see it? What's going on here? So he says, "But then," at the top there, "but then I turn myself toward myself and ask myself, 'Who are you?' And I answer, 'A human being, here at my service for my body and my soul, the one of which is outward, the other inward. Which was the one I should use to seek my God, whom I already sought through material objects from the earth clear up to the sky, as far as I could send the message-bearing rays of my eyesight.'" Notice that phrase, the message-bearing rays. So my eyes are there to learn things, to see things that are meaningful. "The soul within is certainly better for informing me, as all the messengers that are material objects relay to it their news." So this is one of the reasons, apart from the point about beauty, that this is such a significant passage for us to read in our context, is because it reflects this ancient way of thinking long, long before there was anything like the scientific revolution. And you get a glimpse in how people often saw the world. In this line here, all the messengers that are material objects. So think about implications of that. That when I see a tree, when I see a ridgeline, a snow-covered ridgeline with the sunlight, that's a messenger. As I said earlier, beauty is a conduit. Something, it isn't in itself, but then at the same time, something comes through it. And that's what Augustine says about physical objects in the material world, that they're messengers. And through it, they relay news to my soul. And it presides and judges, that is my soul, presides and judges the depositions of the sky and the earth and everything in them that says we are not God. God made us. The inside person has found this out through the help of the outside person. My inside self found this out. I did. It was me, my mind working through my physical perception. I asked the whole huge universe about my God, and it answered me, I am not God, but God made me. But, here's a key point in the highlight, doesn't this beauty appear to everyone whose perception is unimpaired? Then why doesn't it speak the same words to everyone? Animals, tiny and large, see it, but they're not able to question it, because in them there is no judicious reasoning placed in charge of the physical senses that bring them news. Great line. No judicious reasoning placed in charge of the senses. This goes back to a similar point to what I was saying earlier when I talked about changing our train of thought. Think about your memories. Your memory bank is visualized in a big set of cubby holes, and you have a little mechanical claw that pulls out the memory that you like to think about, but it always passes over the painful memories because you don't want to think about that. Well, who's moving the claw? If you find yourself thinking about some silly, trivial thing, and you think, oh, I guess, why am I thinking about that? There's so many more important things to turn my focus to, and you switch your focus. Who's pulling the switch? Well, I love the way he articulates that. He says, in animals, there's no judicious reasoning placed in charge of the physical senses. Right. I can choose what to focus on. I can switch because there's me inside, and I'm using my body to do what I want to do. Human beings, on the other hand, can question this beauty so as to gaze at unseen things belonging to God and understand these through the creation. So when he said this question, doesn't the beauty appear to everyone whose perception is unimpaired? Then why doesn't it speak the same words to everyone? Have you ever had this experience? Maybe those who live in Utah are more prone to this, or maybe the Mountain West in general, or if you live close to the coast. And I'm being prejudiced here because there's beauty everywhere, right? So I shouldn't be so snooty as to think the only really beautiful places are mountains or the beach. But anyway, have you ever been somewhere and you're just so overwhelmed with it? You thought, oh my goodness, that was the most beautiful. I cannot get over it. And maybe when you were there, you just couldn't stop taking pictures because I got to take so many to try to get the right angle and capture what I'm seeing here. And you were just struck by it. And then either you were with somebody or maybe later you met somebody who had been to the same place. Let's say somebody you meet later on who's been to that place, and you say, oh, you've been there too? What, wasn't that great? And they say, oh yeah, that's really pretty. And you think, well, what? Well, real pretty, but that's more than that. But oh yeah, it was great. You know what? They have a great little diner there at the visitor center. Like, that's what you're thinking about? Is you had the sandwich after you... Did you see the same place I saw? Well, that's what he's talking about. Why doesn't this beauty appear to everyone whose perception is unimpaired? Why doesn't it speak the same? And he uses the word judge. It's the same concept as contemplate. It doesn't reflect on. He says, essentially, this is on your quiz. What makes a difference is that some people stop and they contemplate. They reflect upon it. They think about it. They stop and just let it speak to them. They take it in. They open themselves to it rather than just walking by and concerning themselves with practical matters like what's at the diner, right? Yeah.
Going along with that, I was literally talking to Robert as we were walking over to class. He's from Houston, so they don't have mountains there. And we were talking about he came here to like snowboard and all this stuff. And I was like, honestly, like I've lived here so long that I think I just take the mountains for granted. Like, I've been to other places with different mountains, and I've been like, whoa, that's really cool. I can't believe people just live here. But then I was like, I live somewhere where there's mountains, and it's just normal, and I don't even think about it. Like, yeah, I think they're beautiful, but I think, once you've lived here long enough, you kind of take it for granted, and it's normal, I guess.
Right? And that's a big, we quoted from Chesterton earlier, it's a big theme throughout Chesterton's work is being very deliberate and trying to enable yourself to see things for the first time again, things that you're very familiar with. He's got this great little story where he says there was a man in Brighton, England, and he wanted to sail to the South Pacific and explore some exotic, unexplored island down in the South Asia somewhere. And he got all his preparations ready. He boarded his ship. He got out of sight of land, and his navigation equipment got all turned around. So he wound up sailing back into Brighton Harbor, thinking he was approaching some island in the South Pacific. And then he gets out and goes through his hometown with the eyes of a foreigner, and he says it was only then that he saw his hometown for how it really was. All right. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. Familiarity dulls the senses. The more, and people too, the more we're around people, the more easy it is for us to be dull and insensitive to who they really are and how great they really are. And same thing with places. As I mentioned, I grew up in Northwest Florida, and the first time I came to Utah, I came out here to visit a friend, and I was in the Target in Sandy, and I just remember, and I had this experience in many places, restaurants and stores I would go to. I was so enamored with the mountains, but then I'd get into the store and I was talking with my friend, or we were, whatever we were doing, and I'd kind of forget because, I don't know if this surprises anybody, but every Target and Walmart in the world look the same on the inside. So I'm in Target, it's like no big deal. I just remember coming out of the doors and going, oh, man, I just had to stop. My friend's like, are you ready? We're going to the car now. Look at that. Yeah, it blows your mind. If you've been in the East and you've never seen mountains before, it's absolutely stunning. But anywhere, I mean, and it could be not a natural landscape, but maybe a music, maybe a concert you went to with somebody, and you thought, man, did that one piece they did, and the lights were going, and I was just so, I just felt like I was floating. It was so powerful. And the other person says, yeah, I like that song pretty good. I hear it on the radio sometimes. Well, that's what Augustine's talking about. Why is that the case? And the reason is because, look at the second paragraph there. But people are insubmission to their love for the creation, and those who are in submission, who are subordinate, are not judges. In other words, they don't reflect and contemplate. They don't let it speak to them. Right? So that's one takeaway from this whole section is to start developing this mindset and this habit of stopping, a little cliche, but stopping to smell the roses, right?